Okay, here we go. Our goal tonight is to finish up chapter 19. We should finish it, I believe, very easily. Where we left off, we were dealing with the whole topic, of course, of Ahava Mesuteret, this hidden innate love that every Jew has. And his thesis that has come to the top right now is that when a person goes through a nisayon be'emunah, test of faith, this is when that ahava mesuteret comes through. It's irrational. It's not something you could say is, oh yeah, makes perfect sense. The guy who, let's say, he had absolutely no connection to his Judaism, all of a sudden, yeah, he's going to give up his life for Judaism. That makes absolutely no sense. This is al TV. This is supernatural. And again, it comes out when we say feet to the fire. So I'm going to put up on the screen the next part of this chapter, and then we're going to see just a bit more information before we talk about an additional stage of this. Let me just move you over here. Okay, this is, if you didn't know, this is chapter 19, part 5, and the last chapter. The last part. Okay, now we know that a person who was doing averot, a person who is doing averot, we know that sometimes there are people who are just, their entire life is filled with sin, and some just on occasion. It says, even though a person's, the klipot, these outside forces, remember the klipa is the shell that prevents the kedusha from coming out, and the kedusha from coming in, even though he's been unable to repel those forces for most of his life, for a lot of his life. As our rabbis have told us, that Rishaim, evil people, wicked people, are being guided by their heart. Mikol makom, nevertheless, when he comes to a point where he is tested by Hashem, by the one God, she is sudata hare kodesh, he bechinat chokhmah shebenefesh elokit. We say that this chokhmah, remember that's the direct connection to Hashem, which is found in the neshama elokit. It comes through sheba melubash orein sof baruch hu, which is enrobed in the eternal light of God. Kol haklipot betelim umvutalim. All these things that had him doing averot and doing sin and living a terrible life, whatever a person might have been doing, all those klipot fall by the wayside. They are batel v'hayu kelo hayu mamash lifnei Hashem, and they're as if they didn't even exist any longer in the presence of God. Now you'll notice he quotes 1, 2, 3, 4 psukim. Okay, I'm just going to mention them in general, and then we're going to see Rav Steinsaltz's comment on this. We see that like the mountain would melt before Hashem, like fire in front of fire. All the nations are like nothing again by Hashem. It also says, and harim kadonag masu. All these are various psukim that have one goal, to teach us that when it comes to Hashem, everything could just melt away. If Hashem wanted to make the mountain melt, he makes the mountain melt. If you want all Hamas Yemach Shimon to all just drop dead, halavai, in a second, they'll all drop dead. Halavai, it should happen like that. Easy for us. So Rav Steinsaltz is going to tell us a little bit about these psukim, what he's using these psukim to tell us. I'm going to start over here, where it says, Hatiur shebektuvim ele, the description that is in these psukim are referring to the fact that when Hashem reveals himself, the enemy has no longer any strength. If when Hashem shows up, so to speak, everything melts away, and therefore there's no significance any longer to the inner or outer actors, so to speak. Adam shaya birshut libo, person who was ruled by his heart. Again, we're talking about he did whatever he wanted to. He had no compunction to do any sin. Shavui bereshet shel nisibot uritzonot shechivu oto lalechet b'maslul mesuyam she'en lo pitaron mitzad atzmo. He was stuck He was trapped in a situation of certain circumstances. He was a victim of circumstances, in that he was stuck with no way out. He didn't see a way out. Adam zeh chaser lemaaseh et yicholat habechira b'tov. A person who is so far gone, in a sense, has lost his ability even to choose properly. Ulam, however, lefeta, surprisingly, mitapech olamo min hakatzeh lakatzeh, his whole world goes upside down from one extreme to another, to the point where he gets to the state of where he can't choose bera. He can't even choose evil. In other words, with this kind of person, as he goes through his daily life, he can't even any longer get to the point where he can choose something proper, to do the mitzvah, to do something right. He's kind of almost given that up. He's completely given in to every desire he wants. But when he's faced with the nisayon in his emunah, when he's faced with trials and tribulations and a test of his faith, he no longer has the ability to choose evil, to choose bad. It's almost what happened at the time when we stood at Har Sinai. It's a revelation of Hashem, similar to when Hashem lifted the mountain over the Bnei Yisrael. Everything falls by the wayside in light of the God's revelation. Now, put it into practical terms. Let's say you're sitting in a room with your boss. Okay, you work for a company, and the owner of the company's there, and you're talking to him, and everyone's sitting because they respect the boss, and they're nervous about his presence. And then in walks the President of the United States. In walks the Prime Minister of Israel. Whatever, forget your politics. Everything changes. The dynamic in the room changes. I don't care how important your boss was. This now changes everything because the president is there, the prime minister there, whoever is present takes over the room, so to speak. The Havdil, when Hashem's presence is revealed, so to speak, when there is a test of a person's emunah, that makes melt away. That's why he brings all these psukim, melt away all the evil, all this, the ta'avot and desires for bad, and now only can think of as good. Doesn't mean the person himself becomes a different person. Because this revelation came from an internal force. But this revelation is so significant that in light of the revelation, which means the light of Hashem coming through, this ahava mesuteret coming through, kol havayato hakodemet hayta kelo hayta. What he went through until now is as if it didn't happen. I'm going to not read the rest of this slide. And he's saying like this. He's almost giving us until now, he told us in this chapter, where's the ahava mesuteret? What brings out this ahava mesuteret, this hidden love? Now he's telling us, what is the mechanics? The mechanics is that when push comes to shove, until now, he did what he wanted to do, or she. He did what he wanted to do. He's ruled by his heart. This klipa, this shell that prevents any kedusha from coming through, is completely surrounded him. There seems to be no hope of him really redeeming himself. And all of a sudden, he's placed in a situation where he has to choose. And it's not a matter of a choice any longer. The choice isn't, do I have to give up my life? Not. Do I try to save somebody at the risk of my own life? He's on autopilot. What is that autopilot? Yava mesuteret. That's what comes through. And that's what he's saying, that everything with the revelation of Hashem, so to speak, through the chokhmah, through that direct connection to Hashem, that causes the klipot, the shell, to melt away. And now he's ruled by his nefesh elokit. Let's take a look now at the text. I'll check, make sure. Right, okay. So we have some more text to read here. Here we go. Sorry. This eternal light of Hashem that exists in the chokhmah, in our neshama, gadol va'atzum kocho, it is so great and powerful, this power, kol kach, so much so, legaresh v'lidchot hasitra achra v'klipot, that light is so powerful that it can actually drive away the sitra achra, which could be, and the klipot, which are all these things that prevent him from doing the right thing in his life till now. What does this mean? The neshama is not only afraid of doing something against Hashem, even an external act, such as bow down to an idol. We're going to see, he's going to say this in a minute. He's building a case right now that everything changes when the person is faced with this, not a crisis in faith, a trial of faith, is nisayon. And he says as follows, he will be able to stand this test, to even potentially have to give up his life. Even if it means doing an action, I say should not do an action that goes against just emunah. What is he talking about faith? Kigon. What happens? Someone says to him, to bow down to an idol. He knows the guy puts a gun to his head. And he says, bow down to this idol, I'm going to kill you. Fine, I'll bow down to the stupid idol. In his mind, it means nothing. He's not bowing down to it. He couldn't care less. He loves Hashem. But even that external action, his neshama won't let him do that. Because that is where there's the gilui or shechina, the light of Hashem, so to speak, reveals itself, drives away this desire to do whatever he wants. And even though it's only an outward action of him bowing down and not in his heart or head, he's not willing to do that. He's willing to give up his life. It's also, what if Hashem, as someone said, what if someone says, I want you to curse God? To curse God, not allowed to do that. It's a death sentence. Says, fine, you know what? I'm going to curse God, but I don't mean it. Even that he wouldn't be willing to do. Even though his mouth and his heart aren't in sync. What does that mean? It means he's saying the words, but he doesn't mean them. He's still going to be willing to give up his life. Instead of doing that, but rather his heart is completely filled with the love of Hashem. Now, what is this leading to? We have talked about, since the beginning of the book, two sides of the same coin, and that is ahava, love of Hashem, and yir'ah, fear or awe of Hashem. Until this point right now, in this chapter, he's discussed ahava mesuteret, the innate love of Hashem, the hidden love of Hashem, and how it comes out and manifests itself. How does it come out? But what about the other side of the coin? What about fear? What do you mean? How can there be a natural fear? Ahava and yir'ah go together. You can't separate them. So how is there a natural or hidden fear? Where's that? How does that come up? Let's take a look. This, his inability to say, you know what, I'll bow down to the idol even though my brain isn't going to accept that. I'll curse God, chas v'shalom, even though I don't really mean the words. Why will he not do that? He'd rather give up his life because he has a fear. What's the fear? The fear is not he's doing something against Hashem. The fear is by doing something now against Hashem, he's distancing himself from Hashem and lessening the love. The ahava mesuteret prevents him from doing something that would go against anything that would distance him from Hashem. The fear is not the fear of Hashem. The fear is getting farther from Hashem. Let's take a look what he says. This is what we call the fear that's included in the love. That is the natural love that exists in the neshama of every Jew. That its need, its want, its desire, its nature, which we talked about, that the nature of the neshama elokit, the godly soul, is to want to be subsumed in Hashem, because due to this love, and this desire, he also, along with this love of Hashem, part of it is a natural fear that he's afraid of what? that he shouldn't come in contact, in quotes, with any form of avodah zarah, which means not just idolatry, but foreign service of Hashem. Because by doing that, even if he just says the words and doesn't mean them, even if he bows down to the idol and he doesn't think about it and doesn't even mean it, he is coming to doing an action with his body or with his mind, with his speech, that is not in concert with the neshama elokit. And even that he's not willing to do. He's afraid of doing that because he's going to be distancing himself from the amunah Hashem. Even just with his outer garments, meaning not really feeling it, not really having it internalized. It's an action that he may do, but not even believe what he's saying. What's he saying? Let's hear from Reb Steinsaltz a little bit. Which means yir'ah hakula be'ahava. This he refers to the idea of the fear that is included in love. Ahava, love, hi kesher shel kirva v'hitchabrut. Love is a form of connection and closeness. Hayir'ah, fear, on the other hand, shel hitrachakut v'hitnatkut. Fear causes distance and pulling back. These examples of giving up one's life or self-sacrifice in order to not do certain actions, they're not expressions of coming close, but rather of distancing oneself from Hashem. You might say, wait a minute, so bow down to the idol. Don't have it in mind, and that makes you even closer to Hashem. It's showing your real emunah. It says, no, it doesn't work that way. Once your body does an action that is not in concert with the idea of belief, 100% that Hashem is echad u'shmo echad, that already is you're distancing yourself from Hashem, and that's a form of the fear that you don't want. In this understanding, that the bowing down without the true thought about the reason you want to do it, that you don't have the real intention to do it, is an expression of fear. And more precisely, that yirah, that fear, goes part and parcel, hand in hand with all the other cliches, with the love. Love and fear are not necessarily expressions that contradict each other. Because in every time you have love, you also have involved some level of fear. What's the fear? Take a look. When you have a love for something, there's also a fear of being disconnected from that something. So I underline this because this is a critical understanding, and I will expand on it. Yirat Hashem misug zeh eina yirah mipnei Hashem mipnei onesh Hashem. When we use the term fear of Hashem in this context, it is not a fear of God. It is not a fear of being punished by God. It's a fear from being disconnected from God. Let's take this off of screen share for a minute and discuss. Generally, we understand Yirat Hashem and Ahavat Hashem as being maybe two different sides. They go together, but they are maybe opposites. On the one hand, I love Hashem. On the other hand, I fear Hashem. We've talked about the three different possible ideas of fearing Hashem. It could be fear of Hashem. It could be fear of the punishment. And I don't want to get into all the details now. But here he's giving us, under the rubric of Ahava Mesuteret, the innate and hidden love, there's an additional level built into the love. When we come from the perspective that love of something, in this case Hashem, is what wants to bring us closer, then an action that would take us away from that love, we don't want. We'd be afraid of that. I love my wife. I wouldn't want to do something to jeopardize that. I'm not afraid of her. Well, it's a different story. I'm not afraid of my wife. I'm afraid of doing something that could cause a distance between us. Is it always on my mind? No, we have a wonderful, thank God, Baruch Hashem, wonderful relationship. But, thank God we're married many years, and I may have messed up once, twice, maybe. And so there, when you do that, is this fear of like, oh my gosh, there's going to be a distance between us. This is terrible. Doesn't mean I'm afraid of her. Doesn't mean I'm afraid of a punishment. I'm afraid that I'm distancing myself from her. Same thing he's saying here. When we're talking about Ava Mesuteret, there's not only a hidden innate love, there's a hidden and innate fear of Hashem. Not of Hashem, but of distancing yourself from Hashem. So they do go hand in hand. And that's his point over here, because we talked about from almost the beginning of the book, the concepts of both Ahava and Yirah. And now we see how they both can be hidden and innate within a person. Let's go back to the text. One second. Oh, right. That was the end of the chapter. Okay, fine. So let me do this little bit of this is his kind of a summary point of this chapter. I'm going to read that and explain it. And then I came across something I want to read to you kind of as an introduction to the next chapter. And we're going to stop because I don't want to start getting into chapter 20 because it'll start. I don't want to do it just in a short period of time. So now here's what Rav Scheinzel says about the end of this chapter, kind of looking in retrospect. In this chapter, the author finished giving in depth a general overview or an overview of the Ahava Mesuteret, and not overview, an encompassing view of this Ahava Mesuteret, shekiyuma hu karov me'od l'chol adam Yisrael. That to channel that, to reach that, is attainable easily for every Jew. Remember, once a person is put into that situation, in theory, that should be something that will kick in immediately. Because of the basic desire of the neshama to cling to God and to be subsumed by God, and in the fear that's also included in that, and they shouldn't want to disconnect from Hashem. Ad kalautam b'sirut nefesh al kedushat Hashem. Kavanat hadvarim, the intention of his words. It's not just to glorify the Jewish people, or to describe that amazing moment where a person would have to give up his life in honor of Hashem. Ella, rather, rather to draw the ability from this possibility for every single person to do that which seems to be impossible. What's he saying? Part of this idea of the Ahava Mesuteret also is a lesson for us that some things that seem to be impossible for us to do, unachievable, unattainable, that we actually do have the ability to do them. But what is he telling us here? A person stands before something and says, I'm not able to do this. My neshama is not prepared. Let's say someone who doesn't daven regularly, you say, look, you really got to start davening all the time. Or a person doesn't daven with any thought and intention. Okay, really, higiyazman, I'm not really ready. My neshama, I can't. This chapter comes to teach us. You are in fact able. Not only are you able to stretch yourself and daven more and be more in kavana and be better at all these different mitzvot, but ad kadei kach, to such a point that you would even be willing to give up your own neshama. Madua efo atas soteh bifratim. Why do you like? How do you say soteh? To divert from the details. Hanirim ulai chashuvim pachot. Let me read just the sentence. It would seem, if I told you, you have a choice. You can try to change one character trait or give your life up for Hashem. It might seem a little bit easier on the surface to change that character trait. Lamut al hamoked, to die on the altar. What's he saying here? The Ahava Mesuteret is not just this idea that at the moment of truth, the person is going to be willing to give up their life, but it's also a lesson for us that we have abilities that we don't even realize, that we have to take advantage of. Yes, you ask the average Jew, even just ask them, don't, no gun to the head, no anything, just said, would you honestly be willing to give up your life for Hashem? I'm not talking about saying like, hey, God, this is for you and jumping off a roof. God forbid. Talking about if you were put in a situation. I know if you were to ask me, if someone would say to me, Zev Chandler, if someone put a gun to your head and said, you have to do one of the three sins and that are against the Torah that you're not allowed to, that you have to give your life up for, I can say, without the gun to my head, I can say with a clear conscience, the answer is absolutely, positively yes. No question in my mind. And that's even without it, the gun to my head, God forbid. Gun to the head, I know what would happen because that's the Ahava Mesuteret that would come out. That's a pretty strong statement to say, I know for a fact I'd be willing to do that, which means I could stretch myself because by allowing myself to go, that's the end of my existence. Yeah. And that is counterintuitive. I should want to be here. I should want to live. Like, you think it really make a difference to God? If the gun's put to my head and I say, okay, I'll bow down to the idol, or I'll do that, but I'm supposed whatever you ask me to do. The answer is yes, it does, because it reflects on me also. My neshama. My neshama can't let me do that. So if that's the case, it also means that it will not allow, it does allow me and enable me to do things in my life that may have seemed impossible. Now, what I'd like to do is I have something that's literally a page and a half. I'm just going to read it because I think it's a nice little introduction to the next chapter. Because you may have been considering, like, okay, this is a lot of words about self-sacrifice through the Ahava Mesuteret. But truthfully, take 1,000 Jews. How many of the 1,000 Jews are ever in that position? How many people are ever put in that position? Yes, now we are in such a position for many people. And in the Holocaust they were, and in pogroms they were, and many other situations. But generally speaking, we're not in that position very much. So therefore, other than maybe giving us some good lesson that we can really stretch ourselves, Tachlis, how does it do anything for you? How can I, or maybe better question should be, how do I access the Ahava Mesuteret under normal circumstances? So I'm going to read this to you. In the previous chapters, the Alter Rebbe discussed the Torah's assertion that it is very near to us to fulfill. Remember, this was one of the questions we dealt with since the beginning of the book. What do you mean it's karov elecha me'od? It's exceedingly easy to acquire this love of Hashem because it's the Ahava Mesuteret. So he had to deal with this in order to, let me go back here. So discuss the Torah's assertion that it is very near to us to fulfill all the commandments with love and fear of God. He explained that it is indeed very near by means of natural love of God inherent in every Jew. So in other words, before you go further, that the Ahava Mesuteret is always there, and it's always there enabling us to do the mitzvot. He further stated that this love stems from the faculty of chokhmah, of the divine soul, in which the light of the Ein Sof is clothed. Again, we talked about this before, that the chokhmah, our brain, is the direct connection to the eternal light of God. This love is the source of the Jew's power of self-sacrifice. It is what inspires every Jew, regardless of spiritual stature, to forfeit his life rather than deny God's unity. In fact, were a Jew to feel that sin tears him away from God, he would never sin. His love of God and his fear of separation from him would not permit it. So now we're getting to some interesting point. It is only the spirit of folly inspired by Klippa, the self-delusion that sin does not weaken his attachment to God, that allows him to sin. But when he is confronted with an attempt to coerce him to practice idolatry, for example, no such delusion is possible. Clearly, he is being torn away from God, and thereupon the Jew's inherent love of God is aroused, and even the most hardened sinner willingly will suffer martyrdom for his faith in the one God. He's saying like this. We know with the Ahava Mesuteret that the fear aspect of it is the fear of being disconnected from Hashem, which for sure kicks in when he's put into the situation of, do this, bow down to the idol, I'll kill you. But the truth is, if he realized that every time we do a sin, we're distancing ourselves from Hashem, and he was aware of that, the Avama Sutera would kick in, not allow him to sin, because the fear is the distancing himself from God. This same power of self-sacrifice, says the Alter Rebbe, can enable a Jew to refrain from every transgression and to fulfill all the commandments. But if in fact only a clear challenge to one's faith, like idolatry, arouses and activates one hidden love, how can this love serve to motivate one's observance of all the commandments? And this is the big question we're going to deal with in the next chapter, because he has now made a very strong, convincing argument for the Ahava Mesuteret and this built-in fear that's with it to distance yourself from Hashem. But it really, really, really comes out when you're under the gun, literally. But that same Ahava Mesuteret / fear would also prevent you from sinning in general terms. So now the question is, how do we access it? How do we kick that into gear to help us keep and observe all the mitzvot? The Alter Rebbe begins to provide the answer in this coming chapter, which is chapter 20, by explaining the relationship of all positive commandments to the precept of belief in God's unity, which is the first of the commandments, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and all the prohibitive commandments to the prohibition of idolatry, which is you should not have any gods before me. The next parak, next chapter, will be I don't use the word heavy, but it'll be a little bit more on the philosophical side, but it will deal a lot with the topic of Ein Od Milvado, that there, besides God, there is nothing else. These are concepts we're going to talk about at length, which are three things. Ein Od Milvado, that besides God, there's nothing. Usually we understand it to mean that you don't serve anybody but God, but it's much deeper than that. The first of the 10 commandments of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm the Lord your God. The second of the 10 commandments, Lo Yelecha Elohim Acherim Al Panai, you cannot have any foreign gods. While and when we understand and we get into some of that, and we're talking then about these topics, he will use that as a springer for help us understand how to access the Ahava Mesuteret on a, quote, regular basis, and not just when we're, God forbid, in a life-threatening situation. We should also know before when we start this that Prakim Kaf through Kaf Bet, that's 20, 21, 22, deal the topic of Achdut Hashem, the unity, the oneness of God, and what is really considered Avodah Zarah, what is considered idolatry or foreign worship. There's going to be a difference in those terms. Okay, so we'll stop a few minutes early. We'll pick it up Bezrat Hashem next week on chapter 20, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.